It, you'll like immediately see a rec show up. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here tonight for Sin La Habana with filmmaker and musician Kaveh Nabatian and curator Lila Nazemian. This film is part of the Traces of the Unknown program by ArteEast, and we're delighted to be co-presenting this one film from their amazing larger program. We've been so lucky to collaborate with ArteEast on so many occasions. Shout out to Ginu and Lila, and we have an incredible program here for you tonight. Before we dive into the program, I just wanted to say a little bit about where we are. Is this anyone's first time at UnionDocs? Incredible, a bunch of new folks, we love that. So we're a Center for Documentary Art, we're a non-profit. We present, produce, educate around the various world of documentary cinema. So each year we host labs that help filmmakers create new work and produce a collection of short films. We design workshops around the strongest traditions and newest practices in documentary. And we also host events like tonight, and we hope that what we watch and listen to can help expand and shape our ideas of what powerful documentary can look and sound like. So coming back to tonight, we'll be screening Kaveh Nabatian's Sin La Habana, anchored around the protagonist Leonardo, the star ballet dancer in his prestigious dance company, and his partner Sarah, a lawyer, who are trying to escape Havana by any means. After the screening, we'll invite Kaveh up to be in conversation with Programs and Communications Director at ArteEast, Lila Nazemian. I'd love to thank the UnionDocs staff in attendance tonight, Jenny, Camila, Harrison, and our amazing new support, Chelsea and Lexi, who are doing camera stuff with us. And with that, I will invite Lila up to say a few words before we kick off the program.
Hi everyone. Thank you, Tara, for that lovely introduction. As we say every time we do something here, UnionDocs are ArteEast's favorite partners, and I hope you can see why, because they're so wonderful, professional, generous, kind, and they're our favorite people. So we feel very lucky to be here today. I hope that you enjoy the program. Tara said it all. I'm really excited to unpack this work with Kaveh afterwards, and I hope that you will stay for the Q&A because it will be worth it. Hello, is this on? Is it from the... Oh, yeah. These chairs are so grand. All right. Ooh, that's always, every time I watch it, I feel we're going to be dancing afterwards. So before I forget, as Ginu reminded me, this film, Sin La Habana, was part of a program that we curated that has an online component as well. You can see another one of Kaveh's films that you haven't, a newer film called Kitozoa. It's a beautiful film, and it's a documentary. So it's a little different. It's filmed in Haiti, and you can watch that online on ArteArchive.org. And you can also see another film by Jibril Diop Mambeti. It's called Le Franc. It's another amazing film. If you have possibly seen his Tukibuki, this is a short of his that is also really lovely. All right, without further ado, okay, that works. Thank you, Kaveh, for this beautiful film.
Thank you.
So I wanted to first begin to ask you, how did the story develop? How did you develop this story for this film?
It's crazy because I haven't seen this film in like years, and I haven't thought about it in a long time. So it was a trip to revisit it. But it started in 2007 when I went down to Cuba to work on another film. I just wanted to get out of Montreal and write, and so I went to Cuba, and then I met with Pablo Herrera, who was a hip hop producer down there, and yeah, it was just this weird kind of synchronous thing where we got along really well, and he had this idea to make a film that was going to really talk about the Afro-Cuban experience, and at the same time I was kind of like just seeing how interesting the relationship between tourists and Cubans is, and because I mean there's always like whenever you get people of different financial realities and different colors, there's always going to be an interesting mix or like a challenging mix, but in Cuba it's very particular because there's this idea of Cuban sexuality, and in particular it's like male sexuality. This is like very dominant sensual thing that there's like a lot of female sex tourism as well as male sex tourism. And I just thought that was really interesting, and then also, but that, there's extremes of that, and then there's a lot of gradations of that, like what if you meet someone and you just like them, but they're Cuban and you're not, or when does it, how transactional is everything, and in fact, is everything just transactional? So I just started thinking about this idea, and instead of it just being about, when you get on a plane to Havana, you see those couples, and you right away are like, oh, that's what that is, and you just think you know, and I was kind of interested in okay, well, actually, how did that woman end up in this position, and how did this guy end up in this position where he feels like he has to do this, and what's their backstories? And so I did a lot of research, and then I was just kind of fascinated by I was fascinated by Cuba and fascinated about how my idea of Cuba changed the more time I spent there, and then also just this idea of how relationships can be more than kind of meets the eye.
Well, I think something that was really interesting to me the first time that I saw this film is that oftentimes, at least the stereotypical idea that you have of those couples is that one of them is white and the other one is, it could be white Cuban, but is Cuban, is not from, North America, let's say, or Europe. And in this case, it was really refreshing to see the three main characters, if we're counting in Sarah as well, they were all people of color. And that's sometimes a story that you don't necessarily see, and that's a perspective that you don't see. So obviously that comes from your own background, but were you imagining from the beginning that you wanted to have a story that also connected to your own roots?
That's a good question. I mean, I originally was a white girl, so no. But then, there's this kind of other story I wanted to tell about my cousin who is in a really challenging situation. Anyway, I'm not going to get super into it, especially as it's being filmed. But she was in a very challenging situation, and that house was that big house was a prison, was from her. And there's this thing that happens in this kind of old school Iranian Jewish families where it's these kind of quasi-arranged marriages that also have this very transactional thing. So I thought it'd be interesting to make a parallel, and there's stories of people who leave that, and then I was my cousin never left her situation, but I was well, what if you did? She'd be kind of shunned by her family, and so I could imagine being all right, I'm going to get into salsa dancing. Okay, I'm going to go to Cuba, and all right, here's this hot guy. I'm going to I want to live for the first time, and so and that was also based on some people who have left challenging situations in Iranian and other kind of Middle Eastern families, and so I was yeah, why does it have to be white girl, black guy? Why not make it an Iranian girl?
Absolutely. And then, can you tell us a little bit about how the characters were, how you wrote the characters and who they were based on And I want to talk a little bit about, maybe when you say it, then we talk, kind of unpack a little bit some of the rituals that we see in the film.
Well, originally Leonardo was a woman and a writer, but writing is really not cinematic. And then there's this. I didn't have, like, when I first got there, I didn't really realize to what extent ballet is an important part of Cuban culture. It's not what you think of right away when you think of the kind of Buena Vista Social Club beachy thing or whatever. And but like the level of ballet in Cuba is as high as exists in the world, and it is a way of getting out, along with music. Those are kind of the two big ways to, like, those are your easy tickets out of Cuba. And so when I started like researching that and finding out about it, it's like, oh, obviously I'll make him a dancer. And then the guy who plays Julio, his kind of Cuban friend or counterpart in Montreal, he's a former ballet dancer who also defected. I mean, he defected back in like the days where he actually had to really defect, and he became a contemporary dancer. And so I learned a lot about like how Cuban dance works. And Cuban dance is also very, very traditional, and there's not a lot of room. Like if you're in a kind of ballet stream, there's not much room for contemporary dance in Cuba.
Which is where the sort of when he couldn't.
Yeah, he couldn't improvise, and he can't salsa dance. And I mean, actually, originally he was going to be this like hot salsa, like he was going to be able to do it all. But the thing is, that guy who plays Leonardo is a quite famous ballet dancer, and the dude can't salsa dance for his life. And it's because he's got like he started training for ballet when he was 3 or whatever. So he's got these like very tight hips, and everything's very long, and he can't move in that way. And even like for that one sequence where he's dancing with Sara in the Callejón de Hamlet, it was a challenge to get him to like learn how to like move in a more Afro-Cuban way, but he really wanted to because he's an Afro-Cuban dude, and he left when he was like 15 to be in the English National Ballet, and so anyway, now we're getting into a whole other thing. But so that's why I picked him, and then Sada is a lawyer. I mean, the thing in Cuba that's often interesting is if you work with tourists, that's where you get. Those are the people who make the most money, like taxi drivers, or quineteros, and people who are like somehow involved in the tourism industry. Even like some restaurants where people will take tips or whatever. And doctors and lawyers don't make any money. And so I know a bunch of, especially Afro-Cuban people who are in like really high, like what would make a ton of money in New York, who aren't making anything down there and really want to get out. And then for Nassim, yeah, I like this idea that she was kind of this like sort of kept woman by this wealthy guy, and then she's getting out, but she has this whole artistic side to her that's trapped. And then once we met, like pretty much everybody is a non-actor or was a non-actor before they did this, or had very little experience, or very different, like maybe a little bit of theater or whatever. And so then I rewrote a lot of the characters based on who they really are.
Very nice. And so. And then kind of looping back into the actors. But at the beginning of the film, we see a ritual being, that Leonardo's involved in. And then we see that he not only enacts parts of those rituals throughout the film, when he cuts himself or when he throws the what was the squash? It was a squash in the frozen water and all these, and his obsession with birds, because we see at the beginning how, they kill a rooster, they throw it in a moving body of water, what I assume. Tell us a little bit about that, where are those traditions from, and then how did it also influence the characters?
Right, okay. So I was spending a lot of time in Cuba, and so the guy who played the Babalao, who is a Babalao, and I got initiated into Santeria.
What's a Babalao?
Oh, a Babalao is like a Santeria sort of priest, I guess.
Santeria?
Yeah, so Santeria is like the Afro-Cuban religion. And it's related to like voodoo in Haiti and candomblé in Brazil. It's like kind of these West African syncretic, like mixed with Catholicism religions. And so I was initiated into Santeria, and then that guy became my Babalao. And so what we did was we just, and Yona, the actor, had, he'd grown up in that, but he'd been far away from it for a long time. And so he was like kind of nervous, like we were like, we're just gonna do a ritual, like we're just gonna do a reading with that guy, and the readings take forever. Like we saw like a 2-minute section, but it takes like 4 hours, and the producers were freaking out. They're like, what are you doing? This is not a movie about this ritual. But I was like, but also you don't want to, like, I didn't want to mess with the spirits down there. So it was like, let's do it for real, and it'll take the time it takes. And yeah, and so then that becomes kind of like his sort of like spiritual backbone. And then there's this whole idea that dance that he does that mixes Afro-Cuban dancing with ballet that was choreographed by Julio, that's kind of like his spiritual dance. Like he's Chango, which I'll get into in a second. But yeah, he's like, that's who he really is. And I feel like I mean, maybe we all get moments of that where it's like, there's like the dance of your life and we're living here, and then every once in a while you connect with that, the real dance of your life, and you feel it, and then it like goes away and you're like, try to get it again. So, you know, this was a movie about a guy who is somewhere in the back of his head, knows who he is, but he can't find it, and then at the end he finds that dance. But yeah, so then all of the characters were based on the Centuria Orishas, which are like
Spirits,
the
gods.
yeah. And so Chango is the god of fire and lightning, and the color red and white. So Leonardo is Chango, and then
the red jacket.
And the red jacket and the white. So the idea was, and then like as the film goes along, he starts wearing less red and white because he's losing his connection to Chango the longer he's away from Cuba. And then so Sara is Oshun, who's the goddess of like fertility and sensuality and love and honey and squashes and rivers. And so she's pretty much always wearing some element of yellow, but again in Canada then it turns into like just a yellow scarf, whereas in Cuba it's all yellow. And then Nasim is based on the goddess Oya, who's the goddess of wind and change. So there's a lot of like, you know, so she's often wearing, and blue and purple, so she would be wearing those things, and there'd often be like, you couldn't really hear the sound design super well in here, but like, you know, there's a lot of wind whenever she's dealing with something intense. And then Julio is Elegua, who is the kind of god of the crossroads. And so he's always like challenging Leonardo to like make decisions. And yeah, so his colors are red and black, and he's related to Eshu, like, so it's like Elegua is kind of like the good version, Eshu is the bad version, and Julio kind of like goes between the two. So those were the four main, and the whole story was based, so like when you see the readings being done, it's like this binary system where you do a reading for your past and a reading for your present and a reading for your future. And there's a certain number of combinations for each one of those. And there's a total number, and so when you mix those three, there's a total of 256 ways that your life can be kind of determined by these things called patakis. And this whole film is based on a pataki about Chango and Sara and Oya. And what was really trippy was when we did it, 2 out of the 3 times he did the reading, it was like, actually we got that one pataki. So it was just like, all right, we're on, the
right.
Orishas are saying, do it.
Beautiful. I lost my train of thought. One thing I wanted to talk about as well, well, first of all, when you were talking about sort of that he, you know, was searching for himself. I mean, it's a classic story, and I was going to say as well, it's a classic story of migration, immigration, and also about destiny, and sort of reaching for and having agency within your destiny. And what's really interesting to me, obviously, also being Iranian and watching this film initially, assuming that there's nothing more dissimilar than, you know, Iran and Cuba. But then when you think about it and you go deeper and you think actually politically very similar, both having had revolutions, then being completely cut off from the West, you know, spiting the US, and then having to suffer the consequences and having to undergo sanctions for decades, and how that, you know, affects the psyche of the whole country, of the people there, and how everyone is trying to leave. Because this story could have been, let's say, you know, happening to an Iranian couple that were trying anything they could to leave, because the situation even in Iran right now is really difficult. And everybody, I mean, I can't say how many times, every time I go back, everyone is trying to leave, even folks that have it very well, that have very, you know, upper class lives, middle class lives. So there's the political similarities between those countries, and then what I really loved and what was like a revelation were the aesthetic, spiritual, and sort of well, first of all, the most important thing is that the symbolism within both cultures, and specifically the symbolism of birds. Did you have any idea that there was that connection when you started this? So for folks who don't know, obviously we saw the importance of birds within the rituals, the Santeria rituals, but in Persian culture, the basis of most poetry is between flower and a nightingale. And everything is regarding birds. And at the end, when you saw that sort of bird kind of design that she did, that Nassim did, it was a bird called the simorgh, and it's our version of a phoenix. Yes, it was like the one that comes back to life. It's a phoenix, which is the main character of one of the most important and a very long poem, a very famous poem. So the bird is a very important symbol within Persian culture, and clearly here. Did you have any idea that would happen, that existed?
I mean, probably not when I started, but yeah, I mean, it was like, I really love birds, so that was also a reason to like, so I looked into it because I love birds, and I like the idea of, for Nassim, like really like, even though she's like going outside of her culture with this guy and like having potentially a baby out of wedlock and all that, like she's gotten a divorce, which is already a big problem, that she's like delving into this like deeper Iranian thing by like her passion is creating this simorgh, and
rebirthing.
And exactly, well, and this whole thing that she's going to be reborn in some new way that we don't really know exactly, but it's going to be different from the old ways. So yeah, there was that, and then there's also like the connection of blood, in there's a lot of blood in Santeria because there's a lot of sacrifices, and you wouldn't necessarily think that Jewish culture and Santeria have much in common, but I mean, a circumcision, you're chopping a little piece of the dick off a little baby, that's pretty bloody, and you know what I mean? So there's like an element of sacrifice there, and what I thought was interesting is like whatever you believe in, I mean, what I find interesting about faith is that there's like if you look at it, like there's a mountain, there's all these different paths that go up it, and it's almost for sure that there's not like, in my mind anyway, there's like not one path, but if you don't take any steps on any of the paths, you don't go up the mountain at all. And so this was about people who have like faith and are brought to something greater than the mundane through faith, and people who also need to have that faith because the mundane is challenging, and I think that's something that we sometimes lose in our culture here, is that it's like like it just becomes about the subway and the problems, but there's actually this whole other giant world, and that was also where the chemical puppetry came in, like all the stuff of the kind of like well, I mean, we made it in this, like, there's this woman, she calls herself a chemical puppeteer, and she has this giant aquarium, and she puts different temperatures of water in it, and then puts different chemicals in it, basically, or like milk and stuff, and so like all those crazy, like, colorful, that was her, and the idea was there's these like forces that are beyond Santeria or Judaism that are acting on these characters, and so that was like this kind of like parallel, this like universal.
Absolutely.
That was the idea.
That makes sense. I mean, and also I think in the film, Leonardo, at least to me, it seemed like when he saw that scene of the circumcision, I think for him it was a click too. It's like, oh, there are parallels. Oh, this person, it seems different, but actually there's things that I can understand. He understood it. There was
yeah.
At least that's how I understood it.
Oh, that's good. That's interesting.
He was shocked. He was like, oh, but...
I think my intention at the time, although now I can't even remember, but I think my intention at the time was that more like, she's like, get these voodoo dolls out of my house.
Oh, yeah.
And then he's like, and you do this? You know, like this idea that like if you're not from within a certain culture, just about any serious religious practice has rituals that are like, can feel quite shocking or outside of like your comfort zone.
Of course.
And it's not, yeah, I just like the idea of the guy who comes from like this like voodoo-y Caribbean place being like, saying like, wait, what the fuck is this?
All of you are like clapping.
Yeah.
It's true. And then maybe the last thing before we open it up, I think, to everyone, tell me about the music. How did that come together? I mean, you yourself are a musician. Did you, like, was it also really exciting? Did you go and meet musicians? I know that you used, obviously, there was a lot of sort of famous ballet music, classical music that was in the film, but how did you approach that?
Yeah, it was fun to watch it this time because, yeah, I've been, it was just like a weird trip to be like, what would I have done differently? And also, it was interesting because it was like a snapshot of who I was 5 years ago, you know? And it's like I do something so differently now, but there's also things that I would probably not think to do now that I was like, oh, that was actually cool. But yeah, I mean, all the most of the non-classical music I made myself or with friends, and so it was like a really fun challenge because like even ringtones they have proprietary rights on them, and so I was like, okay, I'll design all the ringtones. I'm gonna like write some reggaeton stuff and some more classical stuff and some Persian stuff.
Wait, what? You composed like the song at the beginning, all of that. You composed those,
yeah.
all of it.
Yeah, not everything, but like the song at the beginning. Yeah, like most of the music.
Wow, mashallah, I didn't know that.
Well, it's like, and people were like, you can let someone else do the music. And I was like, no, man, this is like, what else am I gonna do? You know? So that was super fun to be like, and yeah, just like to try to figure out how this kind of like reparto kind of like post reggaeton Cuban music works, or just like figuring it all out was cool. But then obviously there's a lot of licensed music as well. And but one thing that still kills me is that the Romeo and Juliet, the only one, the Prokofiev died in like the 50s, and so he's still for like another 5 years. It's not.
Would you re-release it would you have it changed?
Well, I had to change it. I already dubbed it to Tchaikovsky. It originally says Prokofiev, and then we had to change it to Tchaikovsky, and then so now we put the Tchaikovsky. But people usually do the ballet to the Prokofiev. But it was like interesting for me. Like I actually didn't know much about ballet going into this, so it was a big, interesting challenge to get into it, and also realize like some ballet music is so heavy, and some of it's like pretty frothy and annoying, and so it's like figuring out where to put the frothy, like just kind of like stuff to help you move, and where to put the stuff that like grabs you a little bit. Yeah.
My favorite scenes are when he's dancing ballet in the meat factory.
Oh yeah.
They're amazing. That's brilliant. Who would have thought?
Yeah. That was fun, and like that was like our first day back in Montreal, and we had a skeleton. Like the whole time, my producers didn't really understand what I was doing, and I was like, no, we just need to get a lot of like he needs to dance, he needs to like just get crazy with the meat, and like let's see what happens, and so we just like with his like those weird things over his shoes, we were just like, okay, do a pirouette here, do a pirouette there, do this here, try this here, and like let's do this, and so then it was like really fun in the edit to just like try to make something like musical, and like once I had to change it from the Prokofiev to the Tchaikovsky to like recut it to make it feel like the energy matched the music.
Beautiful. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions?
Yes, I have questions.
Oh, great. Hey!
I'm a huge fan of this film. Unfortunately, the film came out during a time when we could not be together and experience it in a cinema, so it had to be online. I am Arshad Khan. I run a film festival of South Asian cinema, and his film was accepted because he's partly Persian, and we also take Persian filmmakers and Middle Eastern filmmakers, and his film ended up winning all our awards. So people were very annoyed. They're like, how is he South Asian? I'm like, he's Canadian, just work with it. So we had so many questions, and the film is outstanding. It is a stunning piece of cinema. What I wanted to ask you, Kaveh, is how did you accomplish, like we're from Canada, like we have like very limited means for making movies. I want to know, like, how is it that you accomplished this production in shooting in Cuba? How did you get? Maybe somebody already asked this question, but you know, how was it that? How was your collaboration, and how you really captured the essence of the nightmare of being an immigrant? Like, just tell us how you know, first of all, how you worked with your actors, how you wrote the script. And I know they're not short questions, but how did you end up making the film and getting it all together? That's the secret sauce we need to know about. Sorry if it's too many questions.
No, I like it. Arshad, welcome. So how did I make it? How did I make the script? And how did I shoot it in Cuba? Yeah, no problem.
How did you get it funded?
Yeah, it took forever. Like, I started writing this in 2007. It was also the first versions of it were bad. And Pablo, the guy with whom I wrote it, is not a writer either, and he's a musician, so it took us forever to get something good. And then even once we had something sort of half decent, it took forever to get it funded because I was a first-time feature director, and no one trusted me, and it seemed ambitious, and it was like, I started writing in 2007, and it came out in 2020. So that gives you an idea of the scope of it, but also in some ways it made it better, I think. And then in terms of the collaboration in Cuba, it was, the thing is in Cuba, you're like, the power's always going out and everything is broken, but it's also one of these places where you can put your camera just about anywhere and it's going to look good. So it was like with pretty minimal, like we had Astera lights, which can be battery powered, and so then we didn't have to worry about a generator, and we could just kind of like plop them up and get, I think it was also on purpose that it was like visually more exciting in Cuba than in Canada. We tried to make it feel a bit sterile in Canada, but also I feel like Montreal can be very sterile, especially in the winter, and I wanted to, show a big contrast. But no, my Cuban crew was amazing, and Cuba remains a pretty cheap place to shoot it, but you have to go through the ICAIC, which is this Instituto de Cine de no sé qué, but it's like, it's like this like very governmental Cuban institution that will revoke your permit the second they don't like something. And in fact, they did revoke my permit 2 months before we shot. So then we were like trying to figure out if we we're going to try to shoot in the Dominican Republic or what, and that was not going to work. And then, this is kind of...
Why did they revoke?
Well, they wouldn't tell me. So they revoked the permit. Like, we finally had all the funding from Canada, and they're like, yeah, you can't shoot your movie anymore. And I was like, it had been like 13 years in the making, so I was super depressed. And they wouldn't tell us, and so our guy, we had like this guy who had done another film with a Montreal production company, and he was kind of like our man down there, and he had kind of just like kept on knocking on doors to try to figure out what the problem was. And in the end, there was two things. It was that in the Callejón de Hamel scene where the tourists watch the Afro-Cuban dance, there was somebody going around selling like chicle, and so, but in the revolution there's no children working. So I just had to take out that line. And then the other thing was that seemed like it was implied that it was the Ballet Nacional de Cuba that was the organization that was, the company that fired Leonardo for being racist, but that company is like, it's like enshrined in the, like you can't say anything bad about it. So we just had to take out the words ballet. Like basically I took out 2 lines and then it was passed. But they would have never told us if we hadn't, like which is this very like Cuban, like the hell bureaucracy
Sounds
there.
like Iran.
Which also sounds like Iran, yeah, exactly. But yeah, the actual shoot there was amazing. People move slower, but also it's cheaper, so you can spend more time. And like when it's way too hot, you just like take a break, and it's like actually a way more healthy kind of way of working. And the food that like we had to get ICAIC food catered on set, and it was like so disgusting and so heavy, and so like after lunch, everybody would just like pass out, and like it's like these like it'd be like a paper cup with like some like overcooked pork and some like rice and beans and some like brown cabbagey stuff, just like a pile of it, and it was so disgusting. Yeah, and then you'd eat it and then just like pass out for a while and then be like, all right guys, come on, let's shoot a movie. It was like a very like it, and then there'd be somebody like playing music, and then people would start dancing. It was just, and then we got to Canada, and you could really feel the difference, and it worked for the film because it was like, even the way of shooting, it's like, you can't go 1 minute over at lunch or you're fucked. And it's like, everything's so intense and everyone's like checking their watches all the time. And it was just like a whole different, but also everyone's like way more efficient and actually shows up on time. So, you know, it was like a very different way of like moving through the process of creation. And it was, yeah. I guess the other interesting thing I would say is that working with non-actors in this case, like Yona, when he first started, he like didn't get what we were doing at all, and he was being kind of a baby about it, and like he would do like one take and be like, "Ah, I got it, it's okay," and I'd be like, "No, we have to do it again from here. We have to do it again from there, and like do all these different, you know, we've got to get a bunch of different angles," and he just couldn't click into it, you know. But the cinematographer, who's a super cool Mexican dude, Juan Pablo Ramirez, who's like now shooting these like huge Netflix shows and stuff. Well, Yona loves his like phones, and he loves like technology. So he started connecting with Juan Pablo on the technological side of like how the camera works. And then suddenly he was like, well, why do we need these different angles? And Juan Pablo was like, well, so you can cut from this to this. And like by the end, he like Yona was my assistant director. He's like, okay guys, everybody, like let's go. We gotta shoot because we gotta get these shots out there. If we don't get these shots, he's not gonna be able to edit it. And it was just like this amazing thing to see, like how, like I was like, because if, yeah, when it wasn't coming to him from a way that felt comfortable to him, he was like really resistant to it. And then once he really understood it, he like jumped on board with the vision, and it was like this beautiful thing to see. And it was kind of like this. It took a while to figure out, you know, like for example, Aki, who played Nasim, she's from theater, and she would like kind of over prepare a little bit, and usually her first take would be great, and then it would start to just like get too acty, and even now I'm sometimes like, oh god, a little bit too acty there. But oh fuck, I keep forgetting this is film. But anyway, whereas Yona would always forget all of his lines, and so I gradually came to realize that I had to film Aki first and get that first take, and then do the reverse on Yona once he'd like figured out. You know, it's just like these things where maybe with a more seasoned actor you wouldn't have to do those things. It was like, yeah, I mean, it's not even a bad thing. I just deal with the fact that people had different levels of experience. But what was really cool that I think wouldn't have worked if I'd like gotten a really pro actor and had a body double for the dancing scenes and stuff. It was like, it's such a lived thing with Yona, like the way he walks with his feet a little bit out like that, the way, you know, it's just like everything in his movement, I didn't ever have to worry about it feeling like he was a ballet dancer, because he just is one. And that was really nice to not have to like, no, this is how they do it. It's like, you just be you. Like I really tried to bring the script as close, or the film as close to the actual people as possible, so that they wouldn't have to act very much.
I really loved it. That's first I wanted to tell you. And there is a big question mark in my mind. I feel like when the story started in Cuba, everything sounded like normal, just something common. But then I was so surprised and shocked while all the three characters relocate to Canada. Canada became a land that both of these three of this side are immigrant, and the common thing between them is that they didn't have the enough freedom that they wanted to live the way that they wanted to. So there was a big desire to immigrate, like Nasim and her family as an Iranian minority Jews, and then those two as a Cuban artist, and they wanted to like develop their life in a more like a way that they find the capacity in their self. But then the thing that surprised me was that Canada became the area that every part of the story became suspended, and each of these immigrants were pushing so hard for what they wanted. Like Nassim wanted a restart, a joy of life and a family, and then Leonardo wanted like to be a professional dancer, and her girlfriend wanted to be a lawyer. And it's so fascinating that the truth is unrevealing in Canada, among all those snow and coldness, and in a land that none of these main characters are originally from. Nassim is pushing back so hard against like the toxic masculinity of her dad's side. Meanwhile, those Cubans are trying so hard to push back against the policies of their country. I'm just wondering, how did you ended up to think that Canada would be the location that they're gonna find their final destiny? Because I don't know, I never thought like Canada has the potential for destiny, or
Ouch.
for for something like the metaphor of the story, like has so many deep layers. You know, I would have expected to see maybe this part in another area in the world rather than Canada, but it is so interesting for me that I wanted to see that. How did you make a decision that the whole dilemma and suspension is going to happen in Canada, and basically they're going to push each other exactly the way that their inner God wanted to?
Yeah, I like that question. It's funny because I just moved back to Canada like a month ago, and you know it's got its good points, but I hear what you're saying. I mean, okay. Well, there's the most obvious thing is that Canada is where the funding came from, so it had to be there. But also, I mean, the idea is like there's almost no Canadians in the film. You know what I mean? Like the idea was to put these three people in a terrain vague, like in a vague terrain, like in a place that doesn't. It could be kind of anywhere. It could have been in whatever. You know, it could have been in Rotterdam. It could like I didn't want it. Even if I could have done it in a place that had a really big personality like New York, I wouldn't have wanted it to be here because, well, for one thing, we've all seen so many immigration stories in New York, and it's kind of a little bit like played out. But I wanted to film whatever city we did it in a way that made it a little bit faceless, and it was just a place where these three people who none of them speak the language of the place as a first language are forced to, and they don't really, you know, like they're communicating, like Nassim and Leonardo have to communicate with each other in English, but for neither of them it is their first language. And so there's this like, so it's like this kind of like Venn diagram where they're all stuck together in this place that could kind of be anywhere. The only thing is that it's not Cuba and it's not Iran. You know, it's like a place that has potential maybe for, but it's like, but there's also this idea like really strong, probably in Iran too, but like in Cuba for sure, that like as soon as you get out, it's just like, you know, the streets are paved with gold and you're good, you know, and then you get to Canada in the winter and it's a fucking nightmare of hell. So so I wanted to like show that side of it too. Like if I'd filmed Montreal in the summer, it's like a very different feeling place, but in the winter it is just a nasty, nasty place. And I wanted to put them in a nasty place that was this like dream place for them at the same time. You know?
But you know, may I say something?
Yeah.
It's really important to also understand that both Iran and Cuba are like pariah states in Canada and the USA, and it's very interesting because it's a super anti-colonialist kind of statement, and that's actually how we perceive the film a lot in Canada, is that this colonizer, because Canada is a colonized settler colonial state, you know, which is like has benefited from both these countries and constantly does from the global South, that these lovers come together and they're also seeking something, and there's this whole thing of this unfulfilled desire that exists in this land that is built upon genocide and African slavery. So you know that subtext is so important because their ancestors are from Africa. Their ancestors are from Central and Asia and so on. So that subtext is very well understood by Canadians because most Canadians are immigrants unless they're indigenous. So this film, whether anybody realizes it or not, is working in so many anti-colonial layers And so that's why people connect to it globally. That's why, as I said, I'm a South Asian, I'm Pakistani. I was running a South Asian film festival, was the Indian and Pakistani jury members. And they related to this film on a whole other level of understanding colonization and white supremacy and how it affects the global South. So I think that's what the connection between these two is, that they're both from these pariah countries and they're coming together in this kind of economic, socio-economic way.
Thank you, Arshad. Yes, I agree. I mean, definitely, like, I totally agree with that. And also, someone pointed out that, like, almost no white people speak in the whole film, which wasn't actually on purpose, but probably somewhere in there. Like, just this idea to not have, like, because if Nassim had been a white woman, then it would have been almost like a control group, like, okay, I get what she's going through as a white person watching it or whatever, and I just didn't want any of it, you know? And it's true that, like, pretty much everyone who's seen this film in North America is an immigrant on some level, you know? So the hope was for sure that there's, like, some understanding of this idea of migration and, like, the impossible, like, you know, like, I think for Iranians and Cubans, since their cultures are so strong, you leave Iran and maybe you're glad you left, but you can't, like, there's a part of you stays back there, and same for Cubans. And yeah, and so I was trying to play with some of those ideas of these people who've, like, left a bit of their souls behind and are trying to make it in this, like, cold place.
Hi, I loved the film, and I was thinking, I think the most poignant part for me was the factory job that he has when he comes to Canada. I think the word sterile that you used is so depictive of the entire experience that they have there, but especially there. And I was thinking to your point about sacrifice with the roosters and the chickens back in Cuba, and then when he gets to Canada, meat being processed, the end result is the same thing. These animals are dead, but the process is so different. Was that always your intention that he would have that job when he got there? Is that something that you changed around, or? Yeah.
It was kind of the dream. Because I think originally I got the idea in Happy Together by Wong Kar-wai. There's he works in a meat packing plant for a minute. I was like, one day I want to make a movie in a meat packing plant. But it was really hard to actually. At one point, it was going to change into a shampoo plant. Like, we got to put, which was actually cool because it's these giant just vats of liquid that were quite beautiful. But the meat packing factory made a lot more sense because there's this idea, like, I mean, for one thing, there's this, like, shock and horror at animals being sacrificed in Cuba, and then you go into these places where, in these sterile environments where there's just, like, mass, like, carcasses, like, you know, chicken genocide happening in there, you know? And it's like, that's what we're eating, so who are we to, like, you know, say anything about the way anyone does things in Cuba. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely, like, this idea of, like, of sacrifice and that there's, like, a certain connection with the sacrificed animal in Cuba, and that there's, like, this, like, just, like, you know, when he puts that, like, electronic wheelbarrow thing, and it's just, like, 500 chickens, like, just, like, go into this vat of saline solution that's, like, I mean, it was pretty intense. And like, it doesn't smell that intense, but it's just, like, at a certain point, that amount of flesh that you're seeing is just like, oh my, like, I loved meat, and that was, like, a lot for me.
Hi, I loved your movie. It was really cool. So I am just going to ask one quick question. How do you feel about the responsibility of filming as a foreigner?
I mean, it's a small question, but it's a big question, isn't it? I mean, I think everyone has to make their own kind of peace with how they want to do it. Like, I feel like I tend to be more inspired when I'm not at home, so I can only make things that I'm excited and curious and inspired by. So that's why I've often chosen to work outside of Montreal. But the responsibility for sure is, like, I think it's pretty big. Like, I think in this case, in general, Cubans who have watched it have felt like pretty, I mean, authentic's a weird word, but like, it felt like an experience that they connected to, which makes me really happy because I worked really hard with Pablo and with like the crew and with the actors to make sure that it wasn't my idea of it. And in fact, you know, like that's why I was like telling the producer, like, just stay out of it. Let me shoot this reading the way a reading actually happens, because there's no way I don't know enough to plan for it and to write it properly, and like when does he do the thing on the sand, and it's like, let's just try to make it as real as possible. And you know, Pablo, this is like really important to him, so having Pablo on board was a huge thing for me as well. And I guess I'd just say, like, I think when I've filmed in other places, there's been times where I've been filming something and be like, this makes me feel a bit weird. And then it's like, okay, well, that's weird then, so I'm gonna not do it. You know, and I feel like sometimes people try to set up rules for how to, especially in documentary, like, you should do this, you shouldn't do this, and it's like very straight. And sometimes those rules don't make a ton of sense to me, but definitely if I feel like, this feels like maybe a bit icky or a bit exploitative, then it is, and so don't do that, or like at least don't keep it in the film, or like try to, and I guess to try to make it to create something where I get something out of it as an artist and they get something out of it as artists as well, or whatever it is, whether it's financial or like, but that it's like a positive experience and it doesn't, I mean, in Cuba there's like, people have their antenna out for that, so that was helpful, like people don't want to be exploited. And then even more so when this next film that I shot in Haiti, Haitians are like obsessively like enraged about anything that like hints at poverty porn, and so I had to be really careful, and it was good to have to be careful, you know, like I like that. I don't want to, and like it's also a lot about spending time, you know, I spent a lot of time in Cuba before I shot this. I lived in Haiti for a long time before I shot in Haiti. I mean, other people might be able to do it in a way where, I'm not saying that's the way to do it, but for me, I have to feel like not necessarily that I understand a place, but like I speak enough of the language and I can see enough of the things, and I have enough connections with people who will keep me on a track that isn't too exotified, I guess.
Do we want to, Jenny, how are we on time? Do you want to have one last question?
Yeah, sure. If we have another one.
I'm sorry, I have so many questions.
I'll see if anyone else has one first, and then, does anyone else have one?
All yours.
I want to talk about distribution. Like, here's a beautiful film that's won a gazillion awards, many at least have. And then what's happening?
Nothing.
Isn't it on Amazon?
I mean, it's no, it was bought by, or it wasn't bought. It was bought for $0 by an American company that doesn't really specialize in this kind of film, but there was like, I think, thought it would be nice to have it on their roster, and so it's available. I think so far I've made $7 from it, from Amazon sales. But yeah, I mean, it's available. Like, I mean, yeah, man, we have a stupid job, you know. Like, at the end of the day, there's like no one really cares. Like, no one's getting rich off this stuff, and it'd be nice to, but it's more like, I mean, I don't know. I feel like, for me, what's important is to do it right, and then not worry about it too much, like, and just hope that it's available for people, so that like when things like this turn up, and like it's really cool that it's available to people outside of North America for free for a little while, and like, you know, even if like 10 people see it, and there have been some really amazing connections with people who have seen this film and for whom it has meant a lot. Like, maybe it meant even more in that moment in their lives than it meant for me, and I'm fine with that. And yeah, I'd love to have wider distribution, and if you know somebody, you know, let me know. But I can't, like, you know, at this point, this movie's like 4 years old. I can't keep on flogging a dead horse and like calling everybody up and be like, come on, please, hey, maybe we want to do something with this movie. Like, yeah, at a certain point, it's just like, I want to make the next one. I'm done. It's kind of a dark note to end on, but...
Well, I can say
your film is not dead. It will never be dead. Your film is alive. As you can see, such a loving, adoring audience here. The reason I asked you that question is because I was really, truly curious. that a film of that caliber, I mean, it needs to be seen everywhere.
I
And-
agree. And I just to end, sorry to cut you off because we are at time, but I wanted to say in the end is that this film is what also connected us because it's the first film that you shared with me. And it is the film that I saw in Iran with my whole family that they did not understand, which was hysterical. But it's something that from what was that, 2021, during like second wave of COVID, and I was like, we're gonna do something with this film one day, and here we are. It is not dead, as you say, it is not at all dead, and I think it means still a lot, and I think it's just every time I see it, and I've seen it several times, I'm like, wow, so beautiful, so beautiful. It's a beautiful film. So, yeah.
Bring up to Lila for making coffee.
You're going to connect your phone, and we're going to have some really good dance
Some
music.
music, and we can dance it up, or at least drink it up, whatever. Thank you.